So the first toxicity is heavy metals. Now, why is it the first? By the way, these toxicities are in this order not because of relevance as far as what's more important for a person to address and then next important. It's not that. It's really more in the order that they were discovered or that I realized them. So there's no priority based upon how I'm going to present them. It's just based on the order that I discovered them. So heavy metal toxicity was the first thing. Now I'll give you, I like to tell stories because I think people learn better from stories. So heavy metal toxicity is very close and dear to my heart because I have learned that that is the one area of medicine that I believe is endemic, and that if modern medicine addressed it, we would probably eliminate the vast majority of chronic disease. Not all disease, but the vast majority, because 8 out of 10 people that die on our planet die of either heart disease or cancer. 2 out of 10 die from everything else. If you include neurodegenerative disease, then actually 9.2 or 92% of all people that die on this planet die of either heart disease, cancer, or neurodegenerative disease. 8% of death, this is according to the World Health Organization, 8% of causes of death is everything else. So you take homicide, suicide, you take accidental deaths, all natural disasters, the earthquakes, the tsunamis, wars, all disease processes, every cause of death, you put it all together, it only represents 8 out of 100 people dying. The other 92 are dying from neurodegenerative disease, cancer, or heart disease. If you eliminate neurodegenerative disease, 80% or 80 out of 100 people are dying from heart disease and cancer. So when we flip on our TV, we hear about this person was murdered, that car accident, this bus that went over the cliff, this war, so many people died. But we don't hear about cancer and heart disease, how many hundreds of thousands of people died. Now, that's a huge problem. And when you start understanding the role of heavy metal toxicity in cancer, in heart disease, in neurodegenerative disease, you start realizing, my God, this is related to everything. As an example, New England Journal of Medicine showed a study, direct correlation between the toenail clipping levels of mercury and myocardial infarction, heart attacks. A direct correlation. This is in the New England Journal of Medicine. The American Journal of Cardiology showed that patients that died of idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy, which is a fancy term for congestive heart failure that affects younger people, on autopsy, after they died, on autopsy, they found 22,000 times the level of mercury that was supposed to be in the myocardium within the heart tissue. Now, unfortunately, I don't have all the slides here to present to you, but there are DVDs back there, and this is all documented with the slides that you actually see the studies and everything. I just came from Charlotte, so I was running late. We didn't have time to put all that stuff together, but the point being that these are just 2 studies I'm pulling out, and I'm telling you that we have, according to the ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry, which is a subdivision of the Centers for Disease Control, who I've met with now twice. The last time was about 2 years ago in 2006. But according to their data, this is the ATSDR. It's one of their subdirectories. And on the internet, there's a place, if you go to atsdr.gov, I believe it is, there's a link there that's called Toxline, T-O-X-L-I-N-E. And Toxline has all the references for all the studies if you just type in cancer and mercury. It's amazing that if you just do this in Medline, you may find 20, 30 studies. But you do it under Toxline, there's like 600 studies. And this is data from like 5 years ago. So my introduction to heavy metal toxicity was in 1994. I was the chief of emergency medicine at Moncrief Army Community Hospital. Can't say that fast. But heavy metal toxicity is a huge issue in all chronic disease. So that's the first toxicity. I believe it's endemic in our society. The second one, POPs. Does anybody know what POPs are? Persistent organic pollutants. These are the various chemicals that you may have heard of. Preservatives, insecticides, pesticides. These are the benzenes, the toluenes, the organophosphates, the fluorinated hydrocarbons, all these various types of chemicals that we're exposed to on a daily basis, many of which we're not even aware of. Now, Environmental Working Group, EWG.org. You can go to this website. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up sign there, so you're obviously familiar with them. EWG.org published a study July 14th of 2005 I may be wrong, it may be July 14th, 2006, but anyway, I know it's July 14th. And it was a 74-page study where they took placental cord blood. This is blood from newborn babies, first day on the planet. And they checked them for chemicals and metals. And off those chemicals and metals, they checked for 413, and they found 287 of these substances that are associated with neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, every type of pathology you can imagine. First day on the planet. How? How is that possible? It's because the mother, which in all species, the mother is a vector that provides nutrition and all support for the fetus while the fetus is growing. But the mother is not just providing nutrition to the fetus, she's providing everything. That's one reason bone mass actually decreases in a pregnant woman, because all the calcium is being sent and shunted to the fetus. Well, if the mother's toxic, guess what? As she's shunting all the nutrient supply, everything is going to be going with that. Anything that's in her system is going to go with that nutrient supply. So these babies are actually poisoned before they're even getting into our planet. It's because of all these various types of substances that we're exposed to. So the reason they call them persistent organic pollutants is because once they get into the system, they become very difficult to get rid of. And they actually lock up our system. And so you need to do certain types of things that will help the biological process to break these chemicals down into smaller elements that the body can now expel. So we use things such as ozone, infrared, sauna, so the body can get rid of these things. The ozone is actually, when we do that, we actually take blood, ozonate it, put it back in the body, and the German literature actually describes very eloquently how ozone actually helps to break down these persistent organic pollutants into forms that the body can now start to eliminate. So that's our second toxicity, persistent organic pollutants. So heavy metals for one, persistent organic pollutants two. Now, number three, modern medicine has actually done a very good job of addressing. What they haven't done is they haven't explained why people have this problem. The third toxicity is opportunistics. What do I mean by opportunistics? Opportunistics are the bacteria, the virus, the spirochetes, the mycoplasma, the yeast, those types of things. And the reason I call them opportunistics is because they need to have an opportunity to actually affect the body. So if the body's immune system is intact, it's very difficult for these opportunistics to set up house. Why does one person get a cold and another person doesn't? Why does one person get Lyme's and another person doesn't? Why does one person get pneumonia and the other person doesn't? Why does one person get the flu and the other person doesn't? It's because the person that's getting these types of either short or long chronic processes of opportunistic processes, their immune systems have been suppressed. So why has their immune system been suppressed? Because of either one, heavy metals, or two, persistent organic pollutants. So really the first two toxicities help to suppress the immune system that allows for these opportunistic pathologies to set up. If somebody has a very competent and intact immune system, they're not going to be susceptible to getting these problems. Now, if you have a person where everybody's sick and they just never get sick, they never get sick, is that a good sign or a bad sign? Okay, that's a tough question, so let me give you a scenario. This is a real case scenario. Woman comes into my office. She's pulling an oxygen tank behind her. She's had 2 bypass surgeries. She's had breast cancer, and she's had basal cell carcinoma of the skin. She's diabetic. She's got a history of myasthenia gravis, and she's on this oxygen that she's breathing through. Oh, she's also got emphysema. And she's just sitting in front of me in my office, and she tells me her questionnaire. We have a thing called the AHEAD analysis, Advanced Health Evaluation and Assessment for Detoxification. She's filled this questionnaire out, and she has a score that is, the higher the score, the more toxic the person is. And her score is 1/4 what my score is. And this was like 6 years ago, and I'm nationally competing in athletic events and very healthy, and her score is 1/4 my score. And she says that she has no medical problems. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. She says she never gets sick. She's never been sick a day in her life. That's what she said. Now, is that person, from the description I just gave you, is that a good sign that she doesn't get sick, or is that a bad sign she doesn't get sick? Her immune system is basically non-existent. That's why she doesn't get sick. When a person gets a fever, that's a good thing. The body is responding. The body is releasing. The white blood cells are releasing interleukin to cause that fever to occur. When the fever gets too high, we try to control it because protein starts denaturing at 105, 106 degrees, so we try to keep the temperature below. But low-grade temperature, when patients would come into the emergency room, when I did emergency medicine, or even when I did trauma medicine, if you had a post-operative patient that got a temperature of 99, 100 degrees, we didn't freak out about that. That was actually a good thing. The body was responding. Now, of course, they were always concerned that they could be sepsis from the surgery or something, so at 101 degrees we'd culture the patient. But generally speaking, low-grade temperature, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a febrile response. It shows the body's immune system's intact. It's responding. That's a good thing. It's when it starts getting to 102, 103 that, parents, a lot of times when we give Motrin or, children's Motrin or Tylenol in the emergency room, we're not really doing it for the child. We're really doing it for the parents because they want to have something to control, feel like they're in control. But generally speaking, it's a good thing to have a low-grade fever because it shows your body is responding to something. Usually when a person says, I've never been sick in a day in my life, when I'm seeing them, they've already got cancer. They're coming to me because they've got cancer. They're coming to me because they've got this problem or that problem, and that's part of their history. I've never been sick a day in my life, so it's not a good sign. Persistent organic pollutants and heavy metals, the first and second toxicity, depress the immune system and allow these opportunistic things to set up house, and these opportunistic things then cause what we call a subclinical infection. It's a low type of infection, low chronic infection. So everybody got the first 3 toxicities, okay? These 3 toxicities are tangible. They're measurable. And you can address these, even though the first and second ones, the conventional guys may not believe in them, we can substantiate and we can measure it, and it's quantitatively and qualitatively established. The next 4 are somewhat esoteric. Okay, you kind of get into now a little bit of a different realm. So the 4th one is energetics. Do we have a microwave in this building? No. Can you tell the audience, Josh, I don't know whether you know this, how long has it been that I have not had a microwave in my own house?
For 5 years?
Actually, it's more like 6. But I should have had it, not even in my house. We've actually had it pulled out of the wall. When we checked energetically, cancer patients, do you know what the number 1 exposure, negative energetic exposure they had? Microwave. Next 4. The 4th one is energetics. Now, this is where I start to sometimes lose people, so if I start to lose you, I'm going to try to bring you back in. I'm going to be talking in somewhat of an esoteric realm, so I want you to open your heart up and understand what I'm trying to say. The energetics means everything from how you feel about something to the effect of various type of energetic fields having on your system. And that includes electromagnetic radiation, microwave, ambient cell phone radiation, to the energy that you feel of a person that walks into the room, and maybe a really positive person or a really negative person, you feel their energy. Have you ever felt that when somebody, you could have just won the lottery and every worry in the world has just been eliminated, this guy walks in the room and you're like, oh God, not this person, right? Or you could have had somebody just run over your cat and your house just burned down, and this person walks in and just lightens you up and you just feel really good about, because this person just always makes everybody positive. You've all experienced that to a certain level, right? Right, okay. So that's the energy, how an energy of a person can affect somebody. I've even seen dynamics between husbands and wives, and they'll tell me that everything's going great, but I'll see the dynamic with one walks into the room, into the exam room, and how the energetic of the patient will change. Even though they may not think it does, but it does, and it's discernible. It's palpable. So the energetics, the effect of energy and how it has, what the effect of that energy is in your system is very, very significant. And people don't seem to think that. I've had people say, oh, come on, give me a break. How can cell phones have an effect on us? Anybody own a cell phone, like a Nextel or something, and you're driving down the road and you've got the music on, and then your radio does something weird, and it's almost like a crystal ball telling you your phone is about to ring in 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, and boom, the phone rings. There's something that's happening. Those are radio waves that are hitting your cell phone. Your cell phone is registering or causing an interference with your radio. That's causing some type of an effect that you can actually hear. There's an effect going on inside the system too. So to give you guys one piece of advice that you can take home about the energetics, if you have a microwave, unplug it from the wall and keep it as a bread box, but don't use it to cook or warm up anything. 5 is emotional psychological. This one, in my opinion, of all 7, is very, very close in competition with number 7 as being the most important. That emotional and psychological one, I have found to be the definitive, perfect, thank you. I have found to be the definitive difference between success and failure in treating cancer. And when I'm talking about treating cancer, I'm not talking about stage 1 skin cancer. I'm talking about stage 4 breast cancer or pancreatic cancer, something that's spread throughout the body. In those, I'll have patients, we've got patients that we've treated that with only stage 3 B cancer. And they didn't have multi-organ system failure. They were still fine, but they ended up succumbing to the cancer. And I've got other patients that were stage 4 cancer that had already gone through chemo, that had already gone through radiation, that had already been given 6 months to live, where the cancer was already spread from the breast to the lungs, to the liver, to the spleen, to the brain, to the spine. And now, 4, 5, 6 years later, PET scans show no more cancer in the breast, no more in the spine, no more in the scalp, no more in the liver, no more in the spleen, no more in the lungs. So why did that one person get better, whereas the other person didn't? Because they all went through the same treatment. Why is it that some of our patients have gone through treatment, we've been able to measure their immune system, and CAT scans and everything shows that the cancer is no longer there, or it's getting smaller, and their appetite's coming back, and their endurance is coming back, and they're feeling good, and this and that, and everything's great. And then they die 6 weeks later from a heart attack. Or they die 8 weeks later in a car accident. Or they throw a pulmonary emboli in 9 weeks and they die. Yet they were getting better. Or some patients that were getting better, but they died exactly when their oncologist said. Why is that? Well, I believe it's because of some kind of an emotional psychological component. And anybody that disagrees with me, very simply, I can tell you that you haven't treated enough cancer patients to see that. Because every single cancer patient I've ever treated has some deep-seated emotional psychological issue, some kind of a trauma that you would never suspect. But every single one of them has. And I can talk to you about, and if I can talk to you more about that afterwards, but unless that person is able to address it, face it, and get rid of it, it will come back and it will take them. So that emotional psychological component is to me, it's one of the top 2. And I'll tell you the other one is number 7, which I'll get to in a second. In fact, this emotional psychological component was so much, played such a role, it was so much of an issue from what I've seen that I started really concentrating on this component about 5 or 6 years ago. And it took me a couple years to realize that, wait a second, this emotional psychological component actually is not just important in cancer. Guess what it's important in? All chronic disease. Okay? Now, obviously, I'm not as sharp as you are because you just said everything. It took me a couple more years to come to that conclusion. But it really is everything in life. It defines the success in finances, in your social life, your family life, your spiritual life, in business, in every single thing. It just so happens that cancer is the ultimate business success or failure. What's amazing is many of these things are taught to us. I mean, I remember my father encouraging me to read W. Clement Stone and Napoleon Hill and Andrew Carnegie. Many of those principles were actually there. It took that refinement of understanding and living through it and then realizing and modernizing it. And actually the whole conference is taking quantum physics and energy medicine and applying quantum physics and energy medicine to this very aspect. And I can tell you, it's the most exciting thing for me personally. The 6th toxicity, foods. I'm not talking about foods now, that food is toxic in itself, although there are foods that can be toxic, but that really comes into the additives and preservatives in certain types of foods, which would be the heavy metals or the persistent organic pollutants. So that's covered in 1 and 2. And I'm not even talking about foods that may actually end up being toxic just from their own substances, like poisons. What I'm talking about is foods that have been genetically engineered or that have been irradiated and modified. And those changes that have been made to that food, we don't know what the implications on our system are. We don't know how it's going to have an effect on our system. But we know that it's not going to be the optimum effect that we want in our system. So those types of changes that have been done to food, when food is manipulated, so when you talk about food that's been irradiated, you need to stay away from it, because is irradiation good for us? Right? It's not. So how can irradiated food be good for us? And the last one, the last toxicity, is a spiritual toxicity. And I'm not going to talk too much about the spiritual toxicity, but suffice it to say that it used to be part of the emotional psychological, but I split it away because a lot of people have an emotional psychological toxicity, but they don't have a spiritual one, or vice versa. So let me give you an example of spiritual toxicity. Spiritual toxicity is when you believe what you believe so adamantly that you're willing to hurt somebody else because they don't share the same belief as you. Okay? Do you know that there have been more people killed in the name of God than in any other method or mechanism? So, do you think God has ever said, kill in my name? And yet, every religion does it. You had the Crusades that killed literally hundreds of thousands of people. And, you know, you don't need Muslims against Jews, or Muslims against Christians, or Christians against Jews. You've got Christian against Christian violence. In Ireland, for instance, the Catholic against the Protestants. You've got Muslim on Muslim violence, for instance, in Iran and Iraq. You've got, you know, violence against Jews and vice versa. Just for what reason? Because everybody thinks that their answer is the right answer. That's spiritual toxicity. To be truly spiritually enlightened means to accept everybody for what they believe and embrace them with the way that each denomination, each of the religions talk about, whether it's Buddha or Confucius or Muhammad or Jesus or Moses or whoever, they all talked about and preached about acceptance and openness. So, you know, one of my favorite sayings is Confucius said, we should take every opportunity we can to preach and never open our mouths. Okay? So it's living the life and setting the precedence by how you live your life. So that is spiritual toxicity when people can't do that.